Did you know that there are over 3 million abandoned or orphaned oil and gas wells in the United States, and even more than that globally? They're just out there leaking, sometimes spewing methane and other greenhouse gases that are contributing to climate change. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and today I'm going to talk to Mark Mersman from Offset Energy Partners, who has done some work with the Well Done Foundation, a nonprofit that is actively capping these abandoned, orphaned wells around the United States. We'll also talk about carbon credits and what responsibility the oil and gas industries have in cleaning up their mess. First, a quick sponsor message, and then we'll come back with nuggets of hemp news. It's harvest season, and I&D Hemp would like to take this moment to share their support for all of the farmers out there. Farming is hard work, and it's necessary to the success of our nation, whether that's growing the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the homes we live in, or the natural remedies that help so many. It's our farmers who provide. I&D Hemp wishes for everyone a safe and fruitful harvest season. All right, a few nuggets of hemp news this week. It looks like there's something happening out there in Oregon. Here is a story from Hemp Today. The headline reads, Oregon's Operation Table Rock busts hemp operators growing marijuana. The story says that Oregon regulators say that more than 110 licensed hemp operations were found to be illegally growing high THC marijuana after a recent crackdown in Jackson and Josephine counties in the southern part of the state. Operation Table Rock, a joint action by the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission and the Oregon Department of Agriculture, tested plants at 212 registered hemp grows in the two counties, where a total of 335 growing sites are licensed. The story goes on to say that, unfortunately for the hemp industry, the raids in Oregon fulfill a prediction by the DEA, which repeated in its National Drug Threat Assessment report earlier this year that the federal legalization of hemp would mean ongoing headaches for law agencies. The DEA has repeatedly warned that policies surrounding hemp as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill are giving cover to criminal organizations that grow and traffic in illegal marijuana, and states have worried they will not have the resources to police the industry. Oregon, in July, passed a set of legislative amendments to reduce the burden on resources needed to police illegal cannabis operations. The law allows the Agriculture Department to partner with the OLCC and local law enforcement to assess and test crops on cannabis farms. Here's another story from Oregon. This is on naturalresourcereport.com. It's written by the Oregon Family Farm Association, and it says that folks growing hemp in Oregon will find themselves operating under more stringent rules in 2022 as the state hemp programs come under rules established by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That means hemp growers will be subject to background checks, and anyone convicted of a felony can no longer grow or possess hemp for 10 years. Public comment is being accepted until October 22nd on the Oregon Department of Agriculture's revised rules. Under the rules, the state can destroy crops planted by people whose licenses are not approved or have been revoked. Here's another one from Hemp Today. This one's concerning the Czech Republic. Czech President Milo Zeman this week signed a law that establishes the limit for THC in industrial hemp at 1%. That makes the Czech Republic the first European country to strike out ahead of other member states in going beyond current EU guidance that sets the barrier between non-drug cannabis hemp and drug cannabis at 0.2% THC. Many countries around the world are establishing 1% THC as their national limits, breaking with the generally accepted global guidance of the 0.3% that has been observed since hemp re-emerged in the 1990s. All right, just a couple of local items here. This weekend, October 2nd and 3rd, it's the Pennsylvania Cannabis Fall Marketplace. It's at the Renninger's Farmers Market in Kutztown, Pennsylvania. And then the following weekend, October 9th, out in Wrightsville, PA, that's in York County, there is the Cannabis Hemp Fest, rain or shine, 9:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. It's got food, music vendors, and activism and all sorts of things around hemp. So check that out. I will have links to all of these news nuggets on the show page for this episode if you need more information. All right, so let's get into our interview with Mark Mersman. And just a heads up, Mark Mersman is not affiliated with the Well Done Foundation, but he is a champion of the work they're doing. I will be conducting a follow-up interview with Curtis Shuck from the Well Done Foundation, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, and we'll learn more about the great work that he is doing to fight climate change. But I think you'll enjoy this interview with Mark. He has a really interesting perspective, from the oil and gas side of things. So, hey, let's do this. All right, here we go. Mark Mersman, welcome to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here to tell a little bit about what we're doing and how we see the future of hemp evolving around oil and gas.
Awesome. Well, yeah, why don't you give us an introduction? Who are you? What are you doing? What's your deal?
Yeah, you bet. So I am currently residing in Boulder, Colorado. Have been in Colorado for about a year and a half with about a 25-year plus passion and trying to get moved up here. So COVID spurred that. So that brings me to where I'm at. What I've been doing for the last 6 or so years, I've been involved in the cannabinoid space with different product development, had been part on the MJ side and put together a vertical team that won a license in Denmark. So have been in team building mode for quite a while and different projects and things on the industrial hemp side of the business for the last probably 4 or so years and trying to put together a virtual vertical. We're tying all the parties together to where we really have a whole product capability. And in doing that has always had me interested in how we could tie in my past to what industrial hemp can lead to. And my past does involve the oil and gas industry. Okay. So I was on the investment side of oil and gas, doing real estate, the minerals, if you will, but got to know an awful lot of folks in the industry. This was about a decade ago. Spent about a decade in the industry. My dad actually worked for Mobil Oil. So had all of that upbringing, not so much in the field, but certainly understood the industry and what its place is in our world and the challenges that come with it as well. Mm-hmm. And all that to say, those two things have come together in what we are doing right now, which is Offset Energy Partners is one entity, and OFX Solutions is another entity that I'm involved with, where we are helping our states plug the orphan wells that are a real problem for all of us that is just now really becoming known.
Right. Yeah. So I first, became aware of you out in Fort Benton, Montana, back in July. You gave a really great presentation at the IND Hemp banquet that night.
Thank you.
And yeah, I had never considered these orphan wells before. Didn't really know anything about them. But can you sort of explain what an orphan well is and how many there are in the United States and maybe why that's a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have to give a shout out to Curtis Shuck and the Well Done Foundation. And he, in that effort that he is pursuing and putting together, is certainly been helpful in us evolving our approach to how to help with this problem. So Curtis Shuck was being interviewed about a year ago on a podcast very similar to this one. And it was an oil and gas related podcast. So I had that experience in the oil and gas industry. I've always kept an ear to the ground, if you will, with an idea some way, somehow we'll be able to tie more renewable products into the industry. And he mentioned that he was going about plugging orphaned wells utilizing carbon financing. So that is the emerging marketplace that is addressing carbon emissions from companies like ExxonMobil or American Airlines, and how do they reduce their carbon footprint. There's a whole carbon credit marketplace that's evolving and developing right now, so that an American Airlines can actually pay money and buy a carbon offset to offset their footprint. Another dialogue to have, and we'll dive into that if you'd like to in a minute. But the fact that he'd been addressing that, I had been paying attention to the carbon credit markets. I have a finance background before getting into oil and gas and before getting into cannabis and hemp, and have always had a bent towards how do you economically drive behavior. So with it, as he mentioned, carbon financing the plugging of the wells, it just immediately struck a chord with me. I called him immediately out of the gates, and for the last year or so, I've been helping just in various ways in supporting his efforts to adopt these orphan wells and plug them so that they stop their emissions. So what is an orphan well? Well, the oil and gas industry has a good century of operations where, 50 plus years ago, the technology that we have today wasn't being used. And over the course of the history of oil and gas, you may all be aware of the fact that it has its boom times and its bust times. And what an orphan well is and how it becomes to be is in the state of Colorado, where I'm at, we have roughly 60,000 orphan wells that need to be plugged. There are estimated to be 3 million orphan wells across our country.
Just in the United States.
Just in the United
and
States.
Probably way more than that globally, right?
Terrible. Yeah, totally.
And so what are these wells doing? What, like, are they just hanging out there? Are they...
So here's a mom and pop oil and gas company goes out. I've got this great idea. I think I can produce oil out of this particular area in this particular section of the country. And they go out doing that, and they go through the boom of making more money, selling oil, producing oil. And then, oh, wait a sec, the oil market cratered. And as the smaller operators out there, which is a good majority of the oil and gas industry, it's just individuals like us, just who see an opportunity to be in that industry and make a living with that. And over time, unfortunately, the resources can just go away for those companies. They go bankrupt. And if I'm an operator that was producing some smaller, shallower wells that the big oil and gas companies don't have the economic capacity for, then it's a smaller market for someone to pick up that responsibility and keep operating it. Or if that company were to go bankrupt, who's going in there to clean it up? Because that's likely driven by a downturn in the economics in the industry. So the state is now owner of this orphan. There is no longer a responsible party in charge of making sure that that well is closed properly. And now it's on the books of the state. So now we, as the citizens of the state, have to hope that the state has funds to go out and plug those wells, and that's a whole nother.
Well, what's the issue? Like, what if it's not plugged properly? What's going on at the well?
So what we're seeing here, and what the brilliance of Curtis and the Well Done Foundation and how they're approaching this is that these wells are oftentimes, Eric, just a 4.5-inch well bore, just a hole in the ground with nothing in it, and you can literally smell the methane being emitted from those open well bores. So there are, in many instances, oil that's leaking more often than not. And our concern, certainly for the environment as we move forward, as you look at IPCC's new report, and what we need to be doing to try and help reduce emissions here now. These wellbores are just emitting any number of amounts of cars per wellbore every year.
Just spewing the methane and the greenhouse gases.
Controlled, yeah. A lot of greenhouse gases in all kinds of manner.
Just leaving the faucet on and letting it run.
Essentially that, yeah.
Wow.
And there are also plug jobs that were done utilizing technologies from 25. We haven't changed the approach to how we plug a well for decades. So it's just cement in there. And as geology shifts, as things happen, yeah, there's crevices, there's that space in that well bore that gas can still emit out of. So
even a capped well is potentially leaking.
Has the potential to, and certainly as we have this big drive now. So our current administration, and within the infrastructure bill, Eric, there is dollars being allotted to the cleanup of retired coal mines and brownfield areas and these orphan wells. So there's a tension now that's being given to the issue. The states are getting behind it. We are operational in Louisiana right now, and administratively, we're being well embraced by the idea of how we can change the plug design. So that kind of might be a good segue to what we're doing differently now.
Yeah.
So while the Well Done Foundation is going about plugging these orphan wells, they're monitoring the emissions and monitoring that amount so that they can monetize it. And that's where the credit markets are very eager to have projects that are eliminating emissions. And if we can sequester methane gas or avoid emitting methane gas by plugging this well, there's a real value to that.
Yeah.
So that's great. But there's an awful lot of wells out there that you can't just find those that are emitting. We've got to plug them all because there's still surface area remediation that needs to occur. There's groundwater contamination that can occur with these orphan wells. So our approach to this is in support of the Well Done Foundation and what they're doing to find those wells. But when we plug the wells, what we've been incorporating are alternative materials that can do a couple of different things to the industry at large and its approach to plugging wells. One of those is displacement. And why that's important is if you can envision, and this is just a real simple analogy, that you have 1,000-foot long straw going into the ground. So that's this well bore. Well, traditionally, the industry would just put Portland cement down that well bore. So we'd
pour it right in.
Just pour it right in. So we do that and it's plugged and we're good. And there's a metal plate that goes on top. It's a little more than that. It's not so terrible. But Portland cement, for every ton of cement being manufactured, there's roughly, so please, those of you that are very detailed on the carbon sequestration and emission side of things don't always do that, but roughly a ton of CO2 is emitted for every ton of Portland cement that's being manufactured and used.
Wow. Okay.
It adds up. 1,000-foot well bore may only take 10 tons of cement. There's areas that it has to go into. It's not just that area volumetrics of 4.5.
There's like void spaces in the strata and whatnot. Yeah.
Right. So that cement's not just going into the wellbore, it's going into the formation until it stops filling up the void. So it can take an awful lot of cement. What we've been proposing and what we've proven in concept, what I'd done literally just the day before, Eric, when we met in Montana, was put not only hemp hurd in the cement plug, but there is a space in between each of the required cement plugs that has traditionally been cemented, that we are putting other materials in that are approved by the API, the American Petroleum Institute. And not only are we then, by avoiding or displacing the cement that would be in that middle area between a bottom plug and the top plug, we're avoiding that cement to where if that were 8 tons of cement that we needed to put in that plug, where traditionally we've put 10 in the carbon market world, we just avoided 8 tons of CO2 emissions because we avoided that 8 tons of cement.
Wow.
Additionally to that, we aren't there yet, Eric, but hemp hurd has a carbon content to it, roughly 40 to 60%, just like other woody products. That's somewhere in that 50%, just pure carbon. Mm-hmm. And if we, as we, and when we have a methodology that speaks to the life cycle assessment of that hemp hurd going through the cultivation, transportation, processing process, and into a wellbore to be sequestered in that cement, there should be a carbon credit there too. So we're not there yet. That'll be a good 24 months or so likely before we can get that life cycle assessment and get that part going. But for every 1 cubic inch of volume that we can displace of cement with hemp hurd, we're reducing the carbon footprint. You know, what's really fun though, is that hemp hurd is actually a really good material in cement. So the whole reason hempcrete's a very popular thing is because of the silica that's in the hemp hurd tying and binding to that in the limestone and the cement. So we make a better plug too when we're using hemp hurd in that bottom hole plug.
Right.
Additionally, we're using biochar. So biochar is anywhere from 80 to 90% carbon. So it's a little higher carbon content. And that's where, in using that in between the cement plugs, we can really maximize that space in between the cement plugs to have effectively what we refer to as a carbon sink. So we're sinking carbon into that wellbore. That's displacing emissions from the cement and adding additional carbon sequestration because we're throwing a high carbon content material down into the wellbore as well.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's a work in progress. So we're getting there. We've got 5 pilots that are being pursued at the moment in Louisiana right now that we should have underway here in the next 4 to 6 weeks. And just the embrace, we're in conversations with other state governments too to get that use of those materials approved.
Yeah.
And, Well Done is helping out in that effort too, as they've had other states that they're working in. They're wanting to utilize these materials in their plug design as well.
That's fantastic.
Fun stuff.
Yeah. So how many wells have you capped so far? Or how many wells has Well Done, the Well Done Foundation, how many have they capped so far?
Yeah, great question. So I'm not involved on the day-to-day on that. I know that they have had within Montana, they are in the process of plugging a 26 well package. And I believe they've gone a good 5 to 10 into that. They've been really doing the groundwork to get those wells in a position to be plugged. So even down in Louisiana, there, I believe, was about 37 wells that were identified, and that's a key piece. So they aren't necessarily getting plugged yet, but have been identified as wells that the Well Done Foundation could adopt.
Right.
So they take possession of those wells, go through their whole plan, assess the emissions, plug it, and then they submit that effort for carbon credits. So they've got Pennsylvania, Kentucky, I think, Pennsylvania, Louisiana, Kansas, Montana, I believe Ohio. So they've got multiple states, and I think they're upwards of about 150 wells that they've identified that they'll be going after.
Oh, wow.
We are more boots on the ground. Our OFX Solutions operating entity is a Louisiana-based entity at the moment, so we're working very closely with Louisiana's Department of Natural Resources on those efforts. There are many thousands of wells in every one of these states that we will need to be plugging. And so at the moment, that's just been proof of concept. We needed to prove pumpability of biochar into the slurries that we were wanting to do. Same with the hemp herd.
Yep.
Lots to learn, as it is not hydrophobic. So it's absorbing all the water and the cement.
All right.
So it's been an interesting learning curve as that's been developing.
Yeah, hemp is a phytoremediator, so we can draw things out of the soil. Is there any, are you looking into, like using hemp to remediate, Superfund sites and then using that contaminated material to stick in the ground to cap the wells?
Exactly, Eric. Yes, absolutely. Very much so. So a little bit of background in that hemp space. Yeah, very much been attuned to that opportunity and that potential of it. And I understand too, as the host of the event where we met, that the Elliots have been applying hemp in some of those remediation efforts, and we're very excited to pursue that as well. We expect to be able to do that on every one of these well sites because there is so much surface contamination. It's a big part of what our company is focused on.
Right.
Is not just remediating to, hey, okay, we cleaned up the junk. Well, the soil is still likely contaminated. So we do have, it hasn't been implemented yet. It does need to be approved by the states, but our overall surface remediation effort incorporates utilizing hemp and phytoremediation technologies in incorporating a biochar hemp mulch to improve the soil and amend the soil. And then after that, we expect to be in every place that we possibly can, introducing native grasses and ultimately working with ag departments and verifying authorities for carbon credits like Indigo Ag, Nori, and others. We think we can turn these prior oil sites into carbon sink estuaries. Wow. Or conservatories where we can just let them lay fallow, no tilling, just grasslands, biochar infused soil to really amp up the carbon content.
Okay.
And just sit there and watch it sequester carbon over the coming decade or so.
what responsibility does the oil and gas industry have here? Like, shouldn't they be more involved? Like, this shouldn't be left to, a nonprofit to clean up all these wells, right?
It's a really challenging issue and matter. So yes, the industry at large, including all of its constituents, meaning the state regulators and others, we've all done a poor job of managing what happens with these assets that need to be retired. And a big challenge with that came from not getting enough funding in the coffers to take care of the eventuality of some companies going bankrupt. So what we weren't keeping up with as states mandating that we have capital to clean this up on behalf of the oil and gas industry, we weren't mandating large enough sinking funds, if you will, being funded by the oil and gas industry to support those increasing costs. Because as time went by, the cost of the wells got more and more, the complexity of the wells got to be more and more, the depth and length of these verticals, all more. And we weren't increasing the amount of dollars going into these coffers. So now we are in this really challenging position. And that is Well-Done's approach to this is like, listen, the states are underfunded. The industry is not in a position to be able to take care of it through current methodologies. Not that they aren't.
Because they have a lot of money. Like, they've made a lot of money over the past century, right?
So no question about it. And that's where, okay, what is the mechanism to do this? And that's where, not to get into the politics of it or labeling anyone anything other than we have this challenge to fix. And what does fix behavior? Well, I don't know if you ever read the book Freakonomics, but economics really drive behavior. Whether you're dealing drugs inner city or you are trying to put policy in place, economics of a particular behavior are really important to it. So what are the economic incentives currently for the oil and gas industry to support this? Well, nothing so much other than the optics. And there are state mandated programs now that are addressing the amount that's being funded into them. So here comes this carbon credit piece. Well, this is a very contentious topic for the right and the left sides of the argument. But if a project can be funded through carbon markets, where that money comes from is a function of an expense to whoever is buying that carbon credit. So if that's an airline, or if it's Microsoft or Amazon trying to reduce their carbon footprint, or it's ExxonMobil, they all have a mechanism now to pay money to buy a credit to offset their operations. Well, what are those credits made of? How durable are they? Are they really having an impact on our environment? Are they really doing anything?
Right,
So these are really contentious, debatable conversations and points. But what we see right now is that there is a carbon market that's emerging, and that there are really good programs. And I think agriculture has a huge role to play in this moving forward. And it's part of what I'm passionate about too, and working with Ken and others, in the industry of ag. How do we get the carbon credits working for the hemp industry? And I think there's a real possibility there. It's still some science that has to get worked out.
Right.
Nonetheless, that carbon credit, whoever's buying it is doing something to support efforts that are reducing carbon emissions. And what we believe is that there are ways at Offset Energy Partners and OFX Solutions to change the behavior that actually reduces that carbon credit. So by changing this plug design, we are taking what is a carbon producing and emissions producing effort of maybe only 15 to 30 metric tons a project. But if we can remove that times 3 million, well, that's an awful lot. And if we can actually remove the 30 that are being emitted and create an offset of 30, so we actually eliminated 30 and create an offset for an additional 30. Wow, that's a pretty big needle move, just changing our operational activities. So I'm saying that to get back to your question, where we see the oil and gas industry having a way to pay to get out of this is that these are really good credits that they could support. And in their purchasing of these credits that come out of these projects, so if they were to fund a Orphan well project, they get to speak to that optically, PR, all that's a very valid thing for anybody in this industry. As individuals, we are trying to do that with, hey, I'm buying carbon credits just to reduce my own footprint. So if that's happening and we are actually doing projects that are stopping this emission from these orphan wells, we think it's a pretty good way to have industry at large, whether it's oil and gas or airline or whomever, to help fund up these plugging jobs that are reducing that emission from the wellbore just sitting open and emitting gas.
Right. Yeah, it's progress. I mean, my interest in hemp, like we talked about before the show started, but cannabinoids are wonderful, gift from God. But like for me, it's really about this climate change, carbon sequestration thing. That like I believe that agriculture, has to be part of the mitigation solution. And it's great that you're out there doing this work. And I'm just skeptical of the oil and gas industry.
Totally understood. And that's where I think if they could, it's a really complicated topic. So we have this infrastructure bill, and a big concern about the allocated dollars to plugging these wells is how are we going to make sure that that really gets to the job that it's being allocated for? So how do we make sure the industry doesn't just get that money thrown at them is a concern that I've heard quite a bit, and understandably so. The industry at large has not done a good job in how they've handled certain aspects of their business. So with it, how do we put in place oversight? And one of the things that's happening in one state in particular, in anticipation of these dollars coming down to the state level as grants, is there's oversight committees that are being put together on behalf of the appropriations of those dollars, but they are not oil and gas industry members that are doing that. Okay. They are environmentally oriented. The COGCC here in Colorado is a really interesting makeup of individuals. That's the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. And just in 2019, Colorado made a big shift in what the oversight responsibilities for that organization is. From here's a voluntary organization that's overseeing the industry of oil and gas to here is a professional board of predominantly environmentally and other constituents representing our state and all of our state's constituents, being the environment, the residents, industry at large, and every other ancillary aspect of that, to be a good steward in our actions and how we move forward as an oil and gas industry. And that it does have to take into consideration how are we affecting our communities and our environment. And that's a different shift. And Colorado is easily at the forefront of that. I see in another state in particular that an advisory panel anyway is with a similar attitude, trying to figure out how do we make sure the dollars really get put to work right.
Right, because in the past, I think it's been shown that the oil and gas companies have been actively working on miseducation programs to sort of deny the climate change, and they've seeded all of this doubt, within there. And here we are, Okay, I was born in 1972, and by the time I was 8 years old, I had a sense that, we were polluting this place pretty good, and you heard climate change back then, global warming, they called it. And here it is, 40-some years later, and we're in worse shape, right? An absolute crisis. So how...
Nothing was ever done. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so frustrating. Yeah.
I'll land on economics driving that, right? That greed's a terrible thing.
Yeah,
and
indeed.
Economic motivations are a really, really challenging thing for any industry to maintain integrity with how they operate, because they're always being pulled in the direction of profits.
Right. Short-term profits too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we do that? How do we change? Do we need a complete paradigm shift in how we approach business, or what's the way out, Mark?
I kind of think what we're seeing is while it's taken forever to get here, it does seem like we're finally getting the pressure. If at if nothing more than just the optics, and that the industry at large, oil and gas industry, the American Petroleum Institute, just 4 or 6 months ago, acknowledge that, yeah, these carbon markets really do need to come about, because if we're being pragmatic about how the economics of the industry work and our uses for the headset you're using now being derived from plastics that come from oil and gas and everything else that we touch, there are new materials, and that's what's so promising about hemp. I just had an introduction the other day with a very prominent PhD in the hemp industry talking to a plastics company. So it was really fun to see.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what we need. So
it's those types of things. It's little things like what we're doing, as small as it might be. We're helping show the industry how to change their approach. Not the, hey, just pay to offset your emissions, which is going to work, and it'll drive it, and it'll drive other projects that can reduce our emissions. But gosh, if we can show and continue to add operational protocols that do in fact reduce the operational footprint of carbon, then we're onto something. And that's where these are small deals. It's an incremental cost to the operator, but it's a small incremental cost. As hemp herd and other materials get more prominently available, we're going to be able to see that cost come down. It's going to make it so much more easier for adoption.
Good.
And in doing that, what's the downside? I can change my protocol, and I immediately stop emitting on my books 20, 30 metric tons every time I do one of these wells.
Wow.
So
that's amazing. Where can people learn more about the work you're doing and the work they're doing at the Well Done Foundation?
Absolutely, I appreciate that. We're pretty light on the website side of things, but offsetenergypartners.com, and soon we will have ofxsolutions.com will be up and running. I'm just Mark T. Mersman at Gmail, as I think that's my username on Twitter. I'm not very socially savvy on that side of things.
Okay.
Part that's going to be evolving, but
all right, I'll put some links on the show page for the episode so people can click on those and get to you.
No, that's great. And the Well Done Foundation is welldonefoundation.com, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah,
cool. Before we started recording, you had mentioned you were going to tell a story.
Yeah. So
can we lead up to that, or should I ask you a question so you can get to that story?
So I'll share it with you, and we'll see how we might want to be able to incorporate it, because it's my partner. So I don't want to necessarily, it's just the interesting evolution of someone who is a scientist, who up until just the last few weeks really was skeptical about the environmental impacts of human behavior and rooted in science. But there has been a remediation project that was put in front of our team. And in particular, as there was more and more research put into how our ability to sequester carbon in soils was a possibility for us, it became aware to the individual that, wow, yeah, you know what, with ag and tilling and everything we've been doing to release carbon from our soils, and certainly the emissions and everything else that come from our human endeavors and industry, she's like, oh yeah, now I got it now. And we need to do a lot to try and get it back into the soil, right? And that is a really big piece of what we see being able to do. So a natural extension of what we're doing is soil remediation and carbon sinking in areas where we can let that land stay fallow.
Yeah, and the no-till farming practices that are fantastic. I think we need to get all the farmers on board there.
Big push. It's a huge piece of it, for sure.
Yep. Yeah.
So I just thought it was interesting. I think it's wonderful in that we can all hold out hope that as we continue to educate, we can change minds and hearts. And maybe that's the story to take away.
Amen to that. Yeah.
We need to just keep educating.
Education is key. Yep.
Yep.
All right. Well, Mark Mersman, thank you very much for your time today. It's a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you. I
And appreciate the work you're doing.
You bet. My pleasure.
All right. Well, there you go. That's the interview for today. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you learned something from it. Thank you for listening. If you listened to last week's show, you might remember me talking about a bonus episode that I published that same day. While I'm not going to do that today, I do have another episode kind of, waiting in the wings to put out there. So I might put out a weekend edition this weekend. I have an interview with Nick Walters from the National Hemp Growers Co-op that I think you'll enjoy, but I've also got some really exciting interviews coming up for next week too, so there's just so much to talk about, and maybe once a week isn't enough for this podcast. What do you think? I don't know. I'm always curious what you think about anything, so drop me a line. I have gotten some really, really wonderful emails from listeners lately, so thank you for that. Yep, I'm looking at you, Emma and Neil. I really appreciate your suggestions and the fact that you took the time to write to me with your suggestions. It's fantastic. Of course, I can't do this work at all without listeners, and I enjoy this work, and I hope it's meaningful for you. So, I'd love to hear from you. And we need to come up with ways to grow our audience to make our marketing department happy. So, are you a marketing expert? Do you want to call me up and shoot the breeze on what to do? I would love to hear your feedback. So, okay, you can always get in touch with me. Send an email to podcast@lancasterfarming.com or call me up, 717-721-6642. Leave me a message. I'll call you back. All right, so my name is Eric Herlock, and I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Don't take my word for it. Pick yourself up a copy or get yourself a digital subscription. Seriously, if you're a farmer, you need our newspaper. Anyway, speaking of the newspaper, until next time, I'll see you there.
Industrial hemp.
Episode 159 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2021 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, which is part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show was written and recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock. And any music you hear throughout the show is, as always, courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.